Well, I think the work by Jared Diamond, which was published 3 or 4 years ago and won the Pulitzer Prize and has had a major impact on people thinking on the matter. And Diamond has maintained, and I think quite effectively defended the thesis, that what set what he called the Eurasian world apart from, say, Africa, the Americas, or Oceania, is the availability of what he calls domesticable animals. And he runs off a whole list of characteristics that animals have to have in order to be domesticated. And it so happens that the ones that emerge in the Middle East, which then spread both east and west into Europe and to Central and East Asia, are in some sense the very best you can have, and that there are so many of them. And so from the beginning, from the Middle East, we have things like horses, donkeys, sheep, goats, and subsequently animals like chicken, camels, and so on and so forth. There is really nothing like that in Africa. Now, people are obviously going to be surprised at that, because Africa is full of large mammals, zebras and wildebeest and antelopes and so on and so forth. But it turns out that very few of those are domesticable. You know, that much as people have tried, a zebra, even so it may be 99% horse in terms of its genetic content, really is not like a horse in the sense that it cannot be trained, it cannot be tamed easily, you cannot span it before a plow or a carriage. It just won't do. In that regard, I think these sort of prior conditions were extremely important in determining what material civilization was going to look like. Because a civilization that relies heavily on animals is going to have a very, very different shape than one that does not. And not only that animals allow you to cultivate the land in a different and far more efficient way, but they give you other things. They give you certain military advantages. They give you cavalry. They give you transportation advantages. You know, you can ride them from one place to another. You can span them in front of a carriage and use them for, to haul goods or to move people. In that regard, that kind of society is very different than a society where everybody has to walk. Now, in America, before Columbus arrived, basically, if you wanted to move overland, you had to walk. And Europeans, by that time, in the late 15th century, didn't walk. They rode horses. If they were not in a hurry, they may go in a carriage pulled by an oxen. But they didn't have to walk. It makes a big difference. Anna?
Stop there, wait for this one. Yeah.
So,
okay. So Joel, just tell me about the situation in Africa and why they were at a disadvantage.
Now let's ask, in general, what do we mean by the domestication of animals? It doesn't mean fattening them and eating them as much as making other use out of them, and maybe at the very end you eat them, but that's sort of almost like a byproduct. The main reason why you want to domesticate animals is they perform certain services for you. Some of them give you motive power, like horses and oxen. Some of them are used in mills and industrial usage. They give you transportation. They give you dairy products. All of these things you cannot really get unless the animals are tame, unless they are relatively well behaved, unless they are calm, unless they are user-friendly, we would say today. It turns out that there are very few animals in the world who can be bred to exhibit these properties. This is one of them. But there aren't that many of them. If you look to animals that are in many ways quite similar genetically, like wildebeest in Africa or bisons in America, they're just sufficiently different to be domesticable. The same is true, for instance, for zebras and horses. Horses and donkeys can be domesticated. Zebras, so far, nobody has succeeded. There's just something, ever so little wrong with their genetic structure that makes it impossible to domesticate zebras. And people have tried. There have been projects in the 19th century because it would have been a solution, I suppose, in Africa, but it never quite happened. And so the point is that the Europeans and the Asians were uniquely fortunate by having these animals around and building large chunks of their material culture on the existence of animals. And when you build another society which doesn't have animals, and then these societies develop for millennia, completely disjointedly, and then they meet, you are going to see a clash, and you are going to see disruption in both of those societies. As it happened, the negative consequences of the disruption were very asymmetrically distributed. The original inhabitants of pre-Columbian America took the brunt. They really got the short end of the stick, which is one of the greatest tragedies of human history. And, but that does not mean that it was intentional or anything more than a sort of a byproduct of very deep historical forces that nobody really could control.